This show is brought to you by Trends, your day-to-day center.
Welcome to Madinah Media. My name is Hoosain, and this is the second in the series on my show called Modeling a Spiritual Praxis for this 21st Century. In today's episode, I want to share with you an acronym called OPPRESS. It's just a shortcut way of remembering how we can deal with any inter or intra-Muslim hate, and by extension, of course, how we can deal with Islamophobes as well. So essentially, this acronym OPPRESS shows what are some of the challenges that face spiritual transformers like yourself and myself across the continuum. So, I ask myself, are we able to respond, heads held high, when asked, is Islam on the road to being a system of and for the 21st century? Is Islam ready to achieve the diverse purposes that have been defined for it? And is it poised to contribute to the economic and social development challenges that confront an increasingly plural and polarized world bent on an extractive, commodified economy? And where are the ethics in that economy? And where is the sharing of natural resources in that economy? And in fact, should the focus be, as it is inordinately so, on concepts like conversion, reversion, or should it be on the convergence of shared values? And so OPPRESS then, in my slide, as you can see, is an acronym that I use when dealing with inter and intra-Muslim hate. And you and I know that the history of Islam is replete with the casualties of violence, assassinations, poisoning, and all kinds of intrigue and political machinations. And we saw that especially with three of the four rightly guided caliphs. And so the casualties of this hate, of this takfirism, is simply defined as the practice of considering other Muslims or certain Muslims as being apostate, as being excommunicated. People who are hateful and who indulge in despiritualized political predatory ideologies, they use any kind of justification against those who may not agree with their narrow, hateful ideology. So, as you can see here now, OPPRESS deals with several important social issues. I need to ask myself, how do I find the change spaces at an organizational level, at a personal level, at a political level, at a relational level, at an economic level, and at a social level? And lastly, what is the nature of my spiritual speech and what underpins it? So the information behind this particular acronym, OPPRESS, is designed to assist spiritual transformers like yourself and hopefully myself with ideas around how to deal with takfirism and despiritualized sectarianism. We need to know how to respond in the same way to hate, in the same way as we need to know how to respond to gender-based violence, we need to know how to respond to racism, we need to know how to respond to any kind of fascism or any kind of oppression. So the advice that I'm hoping to proffer point to ways of dealing with these ideological fault lines underpinned by extremism, by bigotry, by hate and intolerance of all people. And this seems to be the main obsession of the takfirs. I want to look at issues around power and power relations, and in particular, as a spiritualized critical theorist, as a spiritualized social critical theorist, I want to use the spiritual filter of the Quran and the Sunnah on how to promote the divine good. There's nothing exceptional about it, but it's inspirational for me that this is a recurring refrain that a person has to ask themselves. In fact, if you're looking at the Quran, it is a recurring refrain to avoid dividing the community. We only have to look at chapter 33, verse 58, and again we also have to only look at chapter 49, verse 9, where there is an appeal made to you through the authorial voice of God Almighty in the noble Quran, that we have to bring people together. We have to create a sense of balance and equipoise, and we have to promote a sense of justice. Instead, what we see are warped ideological assumptions justifying the division of humanity based along sectarian lines. So in sum, I want us to explore how we can ask ourselves the question, as spiritual transformers and as change agents, where can we find the change spaces to promote a sense of justice at an organizational level, at a personal level, at a political level, at a relational level, and at an economic level, and also at a social level, and also to think more self-consciously about the spiritual speech that one is using. In this particular slide, I want us to look at what are some of the challenges that face spiritual transformers like yourself and hopefully like myself. So, I always ask, where are the learned alims as intellectuals now, not as parrots, citing rigid juridical laws of another era in my time, and oftentimes decontextualize. And I ask, where are they? If you're looking at all the injustices around the world, why are these alims silent? Why is the World Council of Churches more vocal? Why is the Roman Catholic Pope more vocal against injustice? And so perhaps we need to ask ourselves, all of us, not just the alims, as transformative and organic intellectuals, spiritual intellectuals, we need to ask ourselves, where can we reinsert and reinvent contextually the divine good through our spiritual, if you will, Islamic practices? And then how can we actually respect differences of opinion, and not based on any malice, mind you, but rather to cultivate a positive culture of promoting wisdom, rectitude, compassion, piety, and virtue through the divine book. And so where then is the intellectual and inclusive spiritual wisdom? Why are we actually not adhering the core of chapter 2, verse 172 to verse 174, where we are warned not to be selective in what we are actually advancing, but to be 360 degrees, and to be able to have relational logic and to join the dots to say that this is said at this stage, and we are reminded again at another stage in the divine book. And so where is the intellectual and spiritual engagement? If you wish, where is the constructive, contextual critique underpinned by a sense of justice when people are clarifying certain issues? And where is the intellectual and spiritual contribution which will add to the development of an equitable, just and humane society? Perhaps people could use a Makasit approach, a more just-driven approach, a more 360 degrees appraisal approach, and not just a narrow juridical approach to solving contextual issues. Some people like to use the intellectual tool of iktilaf, and even there it should be underpinned by the ethics of disagreement. Even this engagement with you, I need to ask myself self-consciously, is it an act of ibadat, or is it a promotion of secular politics? So that then in sum are some of the questions that we need to raise when we're dealing with organizational change spaces. And also, how is the governance of those organizations underpinned by the ethics of honesty and transparency and accountability and servant leadership? So it's nothing new. It's actually just a reminder to you and to me on how we need to advance and promote and in fact deepen the practices that God Almighty asks us in the Noble Quran. So one of the fundamental truths then established by the sacred texts is that no one can be compelled to accept Islam. Remember, it's a duty of the Muslim to establish the proof of Islam and model it as a living ambassador of the Quran to all people, so that truth can be made clear from falsehood. After that, after you've engaged people in an invitational way, then it's up to people whether they wish to accept the elegantly simple message and yet profound message of an elevated spiritual life. So whoever wishes to continue upon unbelief, they may do so. You know, of course, like I do, that there's no compulsion in religion, and that in fact is stated in the Noble Quran. And in fact, if you look at the Noble Quran, you will recall that there is in fact a reference that this is a reminder of what has been stated in previous texts, whether they be written texts or whether they be oral texts. And so there should be absolutely no compulsion. And in fact, if you're pushing for compulsion, you're actually engaging with a culture of domination and therefore zulm or oppression. And that is against the practices of what we are supposed to be engaging in according to the Quran and according to the revolutionary prophetic seerah of our Habibi Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. No one, in fact, should be threatened or harmed in any way if they do not wish to accept Islam. The irony, of course, is that here are people, according to the Amman Accord, who are Muslims, but other Muslims have taken it upon themselves to declare who is an apostate, who is a murtad, you've got to ask yourself, who gives anyone the authority to do that? So the recurring refrain is to use wisdom with virtue and piety and taqwa. That is the muttaqi way of any good Muslim. And so I say at an organizational level then, spiritual transformers need to consider what might be the above the line or in your face, on the line or below the line activities that they can use to engage themselves with productively, and that will yield the most amount of public good, and also it will be in the common interest of a country or society at large, regardless of what faith the human being might be following. And also, how might what I'm doing facilitate social justice, through enhanced access to those who are disadvantaged, who are part of the underclass, and who are excluded constituencies. And in our context, who still happen to be mainly Black, African, and poor. Never mind whether they are Muslim or whether they are a people of other faiths. So the role then of spiritual transformers like yourself and myself could be a very powerful lever in the construction of a more just society. That you are a Muslim is a bonus. That you are wishing to be open to having the divine light channel through you is an extra bonus. And that you are doing it to allow the primacy of the will of God Almighty to be in all your actions, then make whatever you are doing an act of ibadat. So the fragile Muslim public institutions and social development priorities, they are in fact using very scarce resources. And they are actually wasting some of these scarce resources on promoting takfirism or sectarianism. And they are making that a crucial promotion for their work, when in fact what they should be promoting is the divine good, which is almost disappearing. So again, I say at an organizational level, spiritual transformers need to consider the pursuit of promoting the divine good. And that divine good is actually in the Noble Quran, and it's elegantly spelled out and given to all of us. So that is critical to our social and spiritual development. So the social necessity then for focusing on the divine good implies the development of your own personal capacity and skills to enhance the qualities of spirituality and modeling it in society, and to honor also the diverse spiritual experiences across all schools of thought. So I really don't care whether you call yourself a Quranist or a Deobandi or a Tablighi or whatever. It matters not to me. What's more important is that you are promoting the divine good. So spiritual transformers for me then could serve as a critic and conscience of society. So that role in the past has rightly been upheld as being fundamental to the role of a critical Muslim citizenry in keeping Islam renewed, vibrant, and substantive. And so, I want to share with you the other roles in the next episode. For now, I just wanted to look at the impact of how you can find the change spaces at an organizational level using a spiritualized critical theory approach, which looks at how best can I let the primacy of the will of God Almighty appear in my actions, in my intentions, and how can I insert the divine good for all of humanity and not just for one particular grouping. Because if you're looking at the Madinah Constitution, there too, the Constitution promotes the notion of sharing in the divine good for all people, regardless of faith or non-faith. And so I'm hoping that in today's session I have inspired you sufficiently to find the change spaces as a spiritual transformer, to continue asking yourself the question, where does the primacy of the will of God appear in whatever I'm doing? How is what I'm doing at an organizational level an act of ibadat that will benefit not just myself or other Muslims, but in fact the whole of mankind? And so I thank you, and I pray for your success, and I wish you well. And I say to all of you, let's live as ambassadors of the divine will, the goodness of what we have been asked to do, and to stop the unproductive habits of promoting hate. I wish you well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the goodness of the divine shine through you and be your shield against all that which is hateful.
This show is brought to you by Trends, your day-to-day center.